We all know that mushrooms belong to kingdom fungi, but there's a lot of other kinds of fungi as well. There's microscopic ones like yeast, and there's bread mold, mildews, and things like that. So how can things that are so different, such as a mushroom and powdery mildew, how can they be in the same kingdom together? What similarity does a mushroom have to bread mold? So for that, we have to look at the cellular level. We've got to look at a single fungal cell to find out what makes it a fungus. So here I've given two characteristics that all fungi have in common. This is what makes something a fungus. First is the presence of chitin in the cell wall, and second is their structure with the mycelium and a hyphae, and we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's focus on the cell with its chitin. So I'm going to focus in on this first section here. And we're going to need to draw a cell first thing. So take about half the space over here. Draw very lightly, kind of a square. Fungal cells are usually kind of cylindrical or rectangular looking, but ours is going to be more square, so we can fit it in here. This won't be too difficult. The most difficult thing is going to be making a double line here. We want an outer line, and then we want an inner line. I'm going to erase my guideline here a little bit. And then very, very close to that line, right inside of it, we're going to make a second line. So this inner line is actually going to represent the membrane. All cells have a membrane. All of your cells have it, plant cells, everything has a membrane. Okay. And we'll look more at the cell wall in just a minute. Right now, let's give the cell a nucleus. I have a little shorthand for DNA. I go like this. I'll make kind of a back and forth motion. You can make it however you'd like to. Let's label this nucleus. And like all cells, it has endoplasmic reticulum, which we're just going to draw as a bunch of squiggles, kind of back and forth like that. These are a little series of tubes, do all kinds of jobs. Some of them have little dots around them, which are the ribosomes, some don't. And we'll label this ER for endoplasmic reticulum. Now, if you haven't studied cells yet and you want to know a lot more about them, you can go over to my website and check out my cells curriculum. You can do a digital download and instantly get access to a whole curriculum about cells. And I'll tell you what these things are. We'll look at exactly what they do. It's an entire book about cells. Here, we're not going to go into it. So if you don't know a lot about cells, just write the words down and maybe that will pique your interest and you can study more about them in the near future. So up here, let's put in some mitochondria. 1 mitochondrion, 2 mitochondria. So let's label this mitochondria. And they like to call these the powerhouses of the cell. These help generate energy. And let's put in some Golgi bodies. Golgi bodies look like pancakes, a stack of pancakes. So I'm going to draw it looking like a stack. You're looking at the edge of it. 3 of these or so, like long ovals. And they usually have some little blobs coming out like that. Golgi bodies. It's capital G because it's somebody's name, guy who discovered them. There's a little bit of a zoomed in view so you can see a little better. put in some other circles. They can represent lysosomes. There's another mitochondrion. We'll label this LYSOSOME, lysosome. There'd be peroxisomes and vacuoles, and vacuoles are kind of like storage areas. Lysosome is it's like the stomach. It's a little digester, a recycling machine. So it would have all these cell parts that you would find in an animal cell or a plant cell. What it doesn't have is chloroplasts. A plant cell would have special organelles here that are green, which do photosynthesis. And you're not going to find the chloroplasts in a fungal cell. So they're not green, and therefore they're not plants. They're much more like animal cells than they are like plant cells. And see, lastly, let's put in some cytoskeleton. If you know a lot about cells, you'll be saying, wait, there's more parts. What about the cytoskeleton? So we'll go ahead and put some stringy lines in the background. The cytoskeleton is basically a series of protein cables that run all through it. These like little threads that tie everything together. And they also provide little highways for things to travel. Now, the really important part for this lesson is the cell wall. So we're going to make a box or a circle around a little piece of the wall, and then make an arrow looking like it's getting bigger, sort of an expanding arrow to show that we're going to take this little piece and we're going to blow it up big. And then in this space, we're going to look at that piece of wall. Now this first line here, this inner line, is the membrane, and we're going to draw it as two lines of circles with some little things in between. So there's 1, 2, and then to be really correct, I should draw 2 like little leg things or tails sticking off each one. But you know, we don't have a lot of time for that. Let's just go like this. So this is a shortcut. A lot of illustrators just do that, and everybody knows that's a membrane. Here's how one artist did it. See that? We'd have to draw 2 little tails here and little heads. So what's happening here is these aren't really circles. They're a group of atoms. It's complicated to draw, so we just draw a circle. But the atoms in this group, they like water, and these little tails, these are strings of carbons with hydrogen attached, and these little tails, they hate water. They love fats, greasy things. They hate water. So there's water inside the cell, and there's water outside the cell, water everywhere, and these little tails just hate it. So they all turn towards each other. They like each other because they both like fat. And so they make a little area in here where there's basically no water. This is an I hate water zone. And the heads stick out like this, and they protect the tail area here, this middle zone, from getting water in it. So then these fat-loving little tails are happy. So that's basically what a membrane is. Let's label it membrane. And all cells are surrounded by a membrane. Even if they have a cell wall on top of that, they still have a membrane. That really confused me when I was just learning about cells. I was like, does it have a membrane or does it have a cell wall? Well, if it has a cell wall, it also has a membrane. It has to. Then the next part right here is where we find this chitin. Now let's show you how some other artists did it. This guy did chitin as little yellow thingies, and this person did chitin as something in here. I'm not sure which one is supposed to be chitin. This person made it as these little orangey blob things. So you know what? It doesn't matter what we draw. It'll be fine. Just make some little, how about little stick things like this? If you want to use a color, you can. You don't have to. Just make some little things like that. And this is the chitin. C-H-I-T-I-N. We'll talk about it in just a minute. Let's finish this drawing. Let's see, next comes some sugars, some sugar strings. This person drew it as green, things like that. This person drew it like that. This person kind of drew this kind of stuff. So you know what? Doesn't matter what you do. Anything will be fine. Let's see. I'm going to make mine look like wavy. Just as long as it looks different from the chitin. Can't look like the chitin. And these are basically sugar strings. Sugar strings. Now we're used to thinking of sugar as something you eat and you burn it for energy. But here we see sugar being used as a structural element. It's a building block of this cell wall. And then these attach to some protein blobs, like that. And off the protein blobs here we have some more stringy sugars. There's many kinds of sugars. Cells have a lot of structural sugars. And your cells have some structural sugars hanging off too. Your cells, of course, don't have chitin or these things, but there would be little sugars hanging right off the membrane. And these sugars act as identification tags and communication devices, and they do all kinds of jobs. And these particular sugars in the fungal cells, in case you're interested, they're called mannan, M-A-N-N-A-N, mannan sugars. And it is related to the word manna, which was the bread that the children of Israel ate and they were wandering in the wilderness in the old Bible story. The sugar mannose is made of little strings of glucose, like down here. We'll look at this in a minute. But a mannose sugar is very similar to this glucose sugar. It's a simple sugar made of a ring of carbons with some other atoms. And when they discovered that little sugar, they called it mannose. So here we have a whole string of little mannose sugars, and so that's where the name mannan came from the word mannose. So now let's go back to the chitin, and let's look at what chitin is. Chitin is a string of glucose molecules. These pink hexagon things, these are glucose, strung together, and each glucose has this little thing hanging off of it, which is a nitrogen atom and a carbon and an oxygen right here. It's called the carboxyl group, and then a methyl group, CH3, hanging off of it. So this thing in the box is called N-acetyl group. There's the N, and the rest of it's the acetyl. And a glucose with its little N-acetyl group hanging off this is called glucosamine. This part, one hexagon with the rectangle on it, that thing is a glucosamine. Gluco for sugar, glucose, and the amine is the nitrogen with the stuff hanging off. Anytime you see amine, that means there's a nitrogen there. So we have a string of glucosamine molecules hooked together. So here's another glucosamine, and here's another glucosamine. So chitin is a string of glucosamine molecules. Now there's a similar molecule, oops, I'm going to have to back out a little bit, called cellulose. And this you find around plant cells. Cellulose is a string of glucose. The hexagon, that's a glucose molecule. It's a string of glucoses hooked together in a certain way, and that's what cellulose is. And you'd find that in a plant cell. That's what would be outside of the membrane here. That's what the cell wall is made out of. It's made out of this. But in a fungal cell, it's basically like if you take cellulose, but you take off this and you put that N-acetyl group on right here. This was that green rectangle right here. So you take a glucose and from cellulose, you take this off and you put that on instead, and that makes this into glucosamine, and you have chitin. So chitin's a little bit like cellulose, but the difference is this part right here. Now, you may be familiar with the word glucosamine. Perhaps you or somebody you know takes a glucosamine supplement. If you're having trouble with your joints, some people try taking glucosamine because our bodies do make use of this. We'll go back to this one. Our own bodies make use of this glucosamine, not as chitin, but in a different way. We can use this in our joint tissue. So if you take some chitin, either from a fungal cell, or the other place this is found is in the shell of arthropods. The arthropods are insects, arachnids, crustaceans. So for example, if you ground up a crab or lobster shell, you'd find a lot of chitin, and you could add a chemical that would break these apart, and you get little glucosamine units. So people that are allergic to crabs and lobsters, to shellfish, might have trouble taking a glucosamine supplement that was made using chitin from the crab. So now they've begun taking the chitin out of a fungal cell, and there's less problem with allergic reactions. This is a little interesting trivia about chitin. So this is what makes a cell a fungal cell. If you've got a layer of chitin around your membrane, you belong in kingdom fungi. The other thing that puts you into that kingdom is that your body looks like a mycelium made of hyphae. Now this drawing is going to be much easier than this one. The hardest part of the lesson is over now. That was the toughest. This is going to be much simpler to draw and to understand. So first, let me show you some pictures of mycelium. This is a mycelium that someone found growing in dirt. Just a bunch of white stringy stuff, and you might think it's roots. It looks a lot like roots, but it isn't a root. There's nothing growing, there's no plant growing off the top. This is the actual body of the fungus. Here's another one. Again, it kind of looks like roots, but it isn't roots. This is the actual animal, so to speak. This is it. This is the real body of a fungus. When it wants to reproduce, some of these little stringy things will start to grow up, and it'll produce a mushroom or a toadstool or a morel or a truffle or whatever it's going to produce. And then we recognize, oh, there, that's a toadstool. Now I know what this mycelium is. It's very hard to tell one mycelium from another without looking at the reproductive structures. Once it sprouts a truffle or a mushroom, it's easy to tell what it is. But under the ground, this stuff, this is the actual organism. I keep saying that, but this is very, very important. People don't realize these aren't the roots of the mushroom. This is the organism. That's what a fungus looks like. And then when it wants to reproduce, it makes those mushrooms and things that we recognize. So what is that stringy white stuff made out of? Well, this is a microscopic view that we're going to draw. A mycelium is a series of cells. Now you already know what the cell looks like over here. We drew a cell, so we're not going to draw the little nucleus and cell parts in here. That'll be too difficult. We're going to make them a little bit longer. We're going to kind of make rectangular cells. But they're long strings of cells attached end to end to end. Actually, let me show you where we're going with this, so you can kind of work at your own pace. This is where we're going. We're going to make this little network of branching stuff. So yours does not need to look like mine. You can branch it any way you'd like. The cells are going to be identical. In fact, they're really identical. They're clones. The cells have just divided and divided through the process of mitosis. They just split in half, and split in half, and split in half. And keep making more and more of themselves. So if you were watching under a microscope, watching these mycelia grow, you just see this one split, and then blip, suddenly, well, there's another one, and this one would split, oh, and it would look a little bit longer. And you just see this keep adding cells out and out. Now remember, this is microscopic. Can't see cells without a microscope. But if we get a whole bunch of these growing together in one place, we'll eventually be able to see it. We'll get a bundle of these. So in that photograph I showed you, there was enough of these things next to each other that you could actually see it as white strings. And they're very often white. It's the usual color. And if you'd like to, you could put like a dot inside each one. Make sure you remember their cells. Now some weird mycelia will not have these divisions between the cells. There are some kinds that don't have those little walls. For example, I wrote down there underneath that box, zygomycota, which is actually the bread molds, things like that. If you looked at them under the microscope, you wouldn't see all these little boxes. It would just look like a solid stick. Okay, so this thing that we're drawing is called the mycelium. The whole thing together is the mycelium. If you're just talking about one branch, one piece, like right here, one of these is a hypha. Hypha is singular, so if I'm talking about this piece right here, I'd call it a hypha. If you're talking about a bunch of these things, they're called hyphae with an AE on the end. That's plural. So one is a hypha, a whole bunch is the hyphae, and if you're talking about the entire thing, it's the mycelium. This used to really confuse me. I'm like, what's the difference between the mycelium and the hyphae? The mycelium is when we're talking about the entire thing at once. So you can't say the body. It doesn't have a body. It's not, an animal. So what do you call it? Well, they call it the mycelium. And then, but you need a word for these individual little strings. And so that's when you use the word hyphae. So now what we need to do is make sure that one of these comes down here near this box. And this box is where we're going to do a close-up. Actually, maybe I'll use this one over here. It leaves me some room for an arrow. So if we were to zoom in on a couple of these, what would they look like? Well, it would just look like a series of cells. We just drew a fungal cell, so you know what's going to be inside of each one. So, like I said, some of these have, it's called the lines in between the cells are called the septa. One septum. Septum, and then we'll put in parentheses the plural. What is septa? One septum, two septa. So the septum is the wall, and that's just like Latin for wall. And then each one would have a nucleus. Now, don't spend a lot of time drawing these, not like we did that other one. You can just kind of shortcut. Hey, we've got some eon around here and some little organelles like that. Like that. Okay, we can even draw the cell wall around it like this. Septum's maybe kind of part of the wall like that. So the hyphae are made of cells strung end to end. That's how small they are. That's the real body of the organism. So remember, if you actually see these things in dirt, it's a whole bunch of these things. Each one is microscopic. And another big thing to remember here, we'll just label this: no chloroplasts. These may look like plant cells, but they're not. These guys cannot do photosynthesis. So the way that they eat is they draw one down here like this. They release enzymes, little chemicals, into their environment. These are digesting enzymes. They just release these chemicals into their environment. Hopefully they're growing in something that has a lot of nutrients like bread or rotten wood or something. And the enzymes digest the stuff around it, and then the nutrients just go straight through the cell wall, right in. Nutrients would be all around here. So they do external digestion. And then just suck the stuff right in through the cell wall. So now that we know what a fungus is, it's time to look at the wide variety in kingdom fungi. There's some very different organisms all in this kingdom. But there's some organisms that used to be in this kingdom that aren't in this kingdom anymore. And I put a note for you. This isn't so much something that you have to really work on remembering right now. This is kind of like for the future you, if you ever take this subject again in a high school, college class, and you happen to want to dig out your old drawing and use it to review, might happen. This note will explain why some of these organisms aren't on this page. So scientists like to reclassify organisms when they find out new information. So just heads up, there are a few fungus-like organisms that used to be classified as fungi but have been reassigned to kingdom Protista. And the protists are the protozoans. These are the amoeba and the paramecium, the galena, and all those little single-celled things that run around under the microscope in your pond water. So the fungi that have been classified as protists include slime molds and water molds. And water molds include species that cause diseases in plants. The slime molds are these weird things that, I mean, they look like a fungus. They really do, but they creep. They actually move. They move around. They don't just grow bigger, they actually move. They just decided they're going to put these guys over into the protozoans. The same with the water molds. So if you are looking at an older book or web page that has information that's not super up to date, you may see these guys classified in the fungi kingdom. But anyways, that's just a note to come back to, just a heads up to be on the lookout for these guys being put in the right kingdom. Okay, so how do you classify fungi? They all look like a mycelium, basically, except for yeast cells. They don't have a mycelium. There's a few that are individual. But for the most part, they look like a mycelium. But it's very difficult to tell what it is exactly. We're like, I don't know, it's some white stringy stuff. But once it grows a toadstool, we say, oh, that's a toadstool, I recognize it. Or if it grows a morel, if it grows a puffball or whatever, then we know what the mycelium is. We have a better idea. So we use the fruiting bodies. We look at the reproductive structures that these things produce, and that's how we classify the fungus. We don't really classify it according to how the mycelium looks. So let's see what a fruiting body actually is. And for this, we're going to draw some grass. All right, so the hard stuff is over. There's no more cells and molecules and everything. This is going to be fun from here on out. We need some grass. And then we're going to draw the main body of the fungus, which is the mycelium. So here it is. In this case, growing in the dirt. Not all of them grow in dirt, but in this case, we'll put it in dirt. Right? So that's a legitimate fungus right there. That's it. That's the organism. But then it decides to reproduce, and so some of these hyphae, I've erased a few pieces of grass there, some of these hyphae start to grow upward, and it's a good thing they have chitin in their shell. This makes them have some stiffness to it. So the cell isn't all just gooey. So the cells have that nice hard chitin around it, and they can go end to end up like this. So a bunch of these hyphae start to grow up, and then they're going to produce some kind of shape up here. Let me show you the drawing that inspired me to do this little drawing. So here we have the mycelium, and you can see right here all the little tiny individual cells. It just looks like that mycelium we drew in that second picture. So here are all the little cells. They go up, and into here, and then some of these guys will have this little sac on the end. Some of them don't. They just go straight up. And in this case, this is a cup fungus. This is something like this. Have you ever seen these growing on a rotten log maybe? Or I find them in my yard. They're not orange in my yard. They're kind of brown, but sometimes I find these guys growing in the yard. So we're going to make a cup fungus. Now here they've kind of done a slice away. They've kind of cut it in half so you can see the inside. So I thought we should do that on our drawing. So let's draw a cup like this. Sort of like that. And then we can draw sort of an oval around the top. And you can even shade a little bit if you want to make it look like a cup. If you kind of go dark and then lighter, 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 lighter. That'll kind of make it look like it's hollow in the center, like that. And then this is kind of like our cutaway, so we want to bring some of these hyphae up like this. They kind of dead end like that. So the mushroom cap, or here the cup cap, is actually made of these hyphae still. And then some will have little sacs, and these are where the spores are. Now a spore is kind of like a seed a little bit. It's a thing that will get planted basically, but there's some differences between seeds and spores, a few biological differences, so we have to call them spores, but it acts like a seed. Okay, so this is a cup fungus. And just to remind me, it's a cross section. You can write these words anywhere you want to. You don't have to put them right where I'm putting them if you want. And these are microscopic sacs. So our drawing is really out of proportion. We would not really be able to see these actually, but we have to draw them large so we can see them on our drawing. Alrighty. So that's basically what a fruiting body is. It's when the hyphae go up here like this, form some kind of a stem. Sometimes there's not much of a stem, but usually a little bit of a stem. And then they form some kind of shape up here. And at the ends, there's these little microscopic sacs filled with spores. We can put contain spores if you want to. We're going to look at this more. We'll find out about the spores in just a minute. Okay, so again, we call it a fruiting body. Mushrooms are fruiting bodies. Truffles are fruiting bodies. Okay, we're going to move over here. And we're going to do another fun picture right here. We want to show that a mycelium will grow multiple fruiting bodies, but a single mycelium will always grow the same type. So we're going to put another little grass line in here. And then we're going to make two mycelia underneath here. Once again, this is the animal, so to speak, right here. That is the fungus. This doesn't need to grow a mushroom unless it wants to reproduce. Just can't see it. The invisible world of fungi. They lurk everywhere. Okay, so this mycelium, when it puts up a fruiting body, it looks like this, let's say. Now you don't have to make yours look like mine. I'm just going to make kind of a toadstooly looking thing like that. And then it might put up another one. And it'll look identical to that one. And then it might put up another one, and every single time it'll look just the same. So that's how you know what species mycelium belongs to. Otherwise it just looks like white fuzz. So now you know, oh, I recognize that mycelium. It's the toadstool mycelium. So this one over here, let's say, put it over here a little bit more, it's going to make you choose a different shape. You don't have to choose this one. I'm just going to make kind of a, let's see, kind of this shape. Some of them kind of look tall like that. And it can maybe have some dots, you know, some of them have those little white dots on it. But you can choose any shape you want to. Point is, they have to be the same. Because this mycelium will always grow the same thing. And I'm going right under these words here. Might as well mention these words. I put in a little neat trivia fact for you. The largest mycelium in the world, as far as anyone knows, is located in Oregon and Malheur National Forest. And this mycelium, one mycelium, covers 2,000 acres. So, like practically all the mushrooms in the park, like, are all related. And here's what they look like. They're like the honey mushroom or something like that. So this is an actual photograph of those mushrooms. And so the mycelium will produce 2,000 acres worth of mushrooms, and they all come from the same structure. So this fungus actually has the world record for the largest living organism on the planet. It's a mycelium. Okay, I'll draw one more in here. Okay, so you get the point. Mycelium is always going to produce the same thing. So these mycelia might look the same under the dirt. We can't really tell the difference. But once they produce a fruiting body, we go, oh, that one's a toadstool and that one's a whatever that thing is. We'll see the difference because we look at the fruiting bodies. And lastly, we come to the topic of classification of fungi. Now, just as a heads up, if you decide you want to know more and you start going to websites or reading books about this, you're going to find out it's a really complicated topic. And you're going to find out that scientists don't really agree on the exact groups that these things should be in. Some people like to subdivide groups and then call them by different names, or they like to, maybe someone else says, no, there should be 3 groups, not 2. So and then they have different names for things sometimes. It's really, really confusing. So I looked at a lot of charts, read some sites, and tried to come up with what I think will be the simplest and the most helpful to you in the future. So we're going to go bare bones and just do the basic 4 groups. So you may see extra information someday about some obscure type of fungus. You're going to say, well, that wasn't on that drawing about fungi. That's true. This is simplified. Not every type of fungus is going to be on here, but this is going to get the major ones. This is going to give you the most information with the least amount of confusion. And then this will give you a place to put future information. If you learn more information about sac fungi, you can say, oh yeah, I remember that was this area on the drawing. And so this will give you kind of a place to start for more information. So having said that, let's look at the 2 biggest groups, the sac fungi and the club fungi. So we have phylum Ascomycota. Myco, MYC or MYCO, always means fungus. Anytime you see myco or myc, you know it's something having to do with fungus. Asci means sac, so these guys are the sac fungi. Now, they don't look like sacs. We're going to see all kinds of different fruiting bodies that don't look like sacs. So the sac, let's draw one right here. Zoom in. The sac is actually microscopic. And actually, maybe I'll show you the picture ahead of time, and then we'll draw it. So here this is a Basidiomycota, and this is an Ascomycota. So here's a sac fungi. This is a morel, and if you look inside it, this is a zoomed in picture, microscopic, you see those little like oval things full of dots. Those are the sacs. And here are some microscope pictures. There they are. That's what they actually look like. And again, there. And the interesting thing is, if you count the dots inside, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's count some over here. So can we find one that's, oh, this one's not quite so clear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's see on this one. If we look back at the picture again, and I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The artist did a good job. Every one of these long things is going to have 8 little dots in it. And those are the spores. Those are like the seeds, but it's called spore. And the reason that there are 8 is because of the way that they were made, the cellular process called meiosis. And when meiosis happens, we start out with a cell. These are the chromosomes, the DNA. And this cell splits in half. And then each of these, and I'll show this, would split like this. This is kind of a half diagram. 4, and then each of these splits. So in this case, you're going to get 8. And that's where the 8 comes from. It's this cellular division process. So let's draw a sac here, this long sac, and it usually is on some kind of a stem. And make sure you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 circles in it. And so each one of these is a spore that can grow into a new mycelium. One of these could pop out, land in the dirt somewhere, on a slice of bread, or wherever it's going to land and grow, and then it will start duplicating itself, and it will become one of these cells, and it'll start duplicating, and it'll grow into a mycelium. So that's where the sac is. Tiny microscopic sacs. So maybe we should just go right here and say, well, what about a club? That's a sac fungi. Where are the clubs? Are the clubs microscopic also? And that's true, they are microscopic. So if you were to look at the underside of this mushroom here, hanging here are these little structures that each have, they look like have golf clubs hanging down from them. And let me show you a better picture. This is an actual microscopic view. And there they are. There's 4 of them. There we go. These are the clubs. Here's another picture. This one you can't see the 4th one. It looks like there's only 3. But they're roughly club shaped. I don't know. To me, they don't really look like clubs, but whoever discovered them thought they looked like clubs. So basidio means club. So the club fungi, don't expect to find a mushroom that looks like a club. It's going to be microscopic, and we can just draw right here some things like we just saw, and put 1, 2, 3, 4 clubs on each one. All right, let's go back over to the Ascomycota. So what kind of fungus has these things? Actually, a rather wide variety. We've got morels, you just saw. We've got truffles, which are little mushroom type things that grow at the base of trees, and people like to eat them. They're edible. We have yeast in this category. Now, yeast is one of the very few types of fungi that doesn't make a mycelium. There's an exception to every rule, even in biology. So these guys bud and they create, it looks like they're in little strings, but it's not a mycelium. But so all kinds of yeast are in this group. Another thing that's in this group is penicillin. This is a petri dish in a lab, and we've got these colonies of fungus growing here. And if we looked at it under a microscope, you'd see something like this. There's like the hyphae growing. This is the fruiting body, actually. These things are all fruiting bodies, and these little stringy things are the hyphae. An interesting story about this is it kind of looks yucky in the petri dish, right? Well, the guy that discovered penicillin thought the same thing. He was doing an experiment with bacteria, and he went to check his bacteria, and he's like, oh, there's a disgusting fungus growing on it. But, like a good scientist, he was observant, and he noticed that where the fungus was growing, there was no bacteria. And he thought, I wonder if the fungus is killing the bacteria. So he did some more experiments, sure enough, and that's where our antibiotic medicine called penicillin came from. This is Penicillium fungus. And also in this category is some weird stuff. This is this cordyceps, strange things. This is actually a giant tarantula spider. Yeah, believe it or not, these are the legs here. This type of fungus likes to grow on arthropods. Maybe its chitin attaches to the chitin in the shell, I don't know. But it likes to grow these long stringy things. Isn't that weird? So there's some really goofy things, and there's some really normal things we can eat. So let's draw them. Let's draw a tree trunk here. Leave some space next to it. Just draw it about that big, not too big. Here's our tree. Put a little grass around it. And then make some little black balls growing here. These are going to be truffles. Truffles are this very expensive type of fungus that people like to put in all kinds of exotic food dishes. Someone gave me some cheese that had truffles in it the other day. Okay. Truffles. These are famous for being found by pigs. There's truffle-smelling pigs. They use dogs too, but historically they've had pigs that would go and smell these, find them by smell, could dig for them and dig them out. And then let's also put a morel here. These are fun to make. Let's make this kind of shape like that. And then all you got to do is put lines like this. You don't have to make any wiggly patterns. I think that's recognizable as a morel. M-O-R-E-L. And up here we've got yeast. This will be easy, just little circles. And then a couple of them you can make it look like it's got a little circle coming off of it. This is how they reproduce. They bud. They just kind of go whoop, and then make another one off to the side. Yeasts. And there's a couple of different kinds. We're familiar with the kind we put in bread, but there's a few other kinds of yeasts. So they belong in the sac fungi group. And then we have Penicillium. Let's make this little hyphae going along like this. We'll make it look like that picture I showed you, that microscopic picture. Go like that, and then make a, see if I can zoom in anymore, just a little bit. It looks like it has this little thing going off the top with a bunch of dots. And label it whoops, I don't really have room there. I think I'll have to move that one down a little bit. Penicil, penicil, L-I-U-M. Penicillium, and then the medicine is penicillin. It comes from the fungus. And we've also got cordyceps. Now this is also the famous zombie ant fungus. So here's the fruiting body sticking out of its head. Most kids know about this now. It's, I guess, been on a lot of nature documentaries. The ant catches the fungus. It's like a disease for the ant. And then the fungus, the mycelium, grows inside the body, and then it's ready to reproduce, and it puts like this, I mean, it's not a mushroom, but this fruiting body right straight up out of the head, and then the fungus takes over the brain, and it causes the ant to like run off the leaf and jump into water, it is, or something, where it helps the spores get released to reproduce. So it seems to like take over the ant's brain and turn it into a zombie. So that's the famous zombie fungus, and it's a type of cordyceps. So let's write C-O-R-D-Y-C-E-P-S, cordyceps. And if you would like to make an ant here, make 3 body parts. The antennae come off that one, and the legs all come off the thorax. Don't put legs off this back. This is the abdomen. It never has legs. The legs all kind of come off that middle part. Gotta be accurate. Alright, and then maybe see some legs behind. Right. And then you could make that little thing sticking up. There's the fruiting body. The poor ant's gotten taken over. Okay, and the cordyceps attacks arthropods. And so remember, I just showed you this other one attacking a tarantula. So arthropods are insects and crustaceans like crabs and lobsters, things like spiders, centipedes, millipedes. So the cordyceps attacks those. Fortunately, it doesn't attack humans. I guess there's some book or movie about fiction about cordyceps attacking humans, but so far it's just staying in the arthropods. Okay, so that's a quick overview of Ascomycota, the sac fungi. Alright, let's go over and draw mushrooms. This will be fun. Basidiomycota, the club fungi. Again, the clubs are microscopic, and what you see are the fruiting bodies. Draw a little grass line there, and let's draw a mushroom. You can draw any shape. You can make it a toadstool. You can shade it or not shade it. You can put dots on it or not, anything you want. We'll just put mushrooms. Classic mushrooms. Toadstools. And put another grass line across here. And we have puffballs. Just make a big round thing like that. Of course, you'd have the mycelium running through there. Puff balls. These are the things you probably like stomp on them and all this brown dust comes flying out. So what's in the brown dust? Little clubs, spores. And another grass line. And we're going to draw something called stink horns. So they're going to look like a horn. Imagine like a deer horn sticking out like that. There's no cap, it just looks like a horn. And I guess they stink. They're called Stinkhorns. We'll shade them a little bit. There we go. And some of them have this delicate basket thing coming off over it, but we'll just leave ours plain. And we also have those tree fungi. You ever see those like shelf things sticking off? Bracket fungi, they call them. In fact, let's just write bracket fungi at the bottom. Bracket fungi. So we'll try to make these things look like they're sticking off the tree. So you'll call them shelf fungi. They come in quite a variety of sizes and colors. Some of them have stripes. Some are little tiny, some are huge. I'm going to shade my tree just a little bit. And then I thought we'd draw another one you might not be familiar with, but it's fun to draw. Make a little wobbly oval like this. And then bring some lines down like this. A grass line down here. And then we can shade this a little bit in here. And these are called chanterelles. C-H-A-N-T, like chant, and then E-R, and then E-L-L-E-S. Chanterelles. Draw another one. So I'll draw two next to each other. They might be on the same mycelium, right? Could be part of the same organism. And then here we're just going to write also a few other things, just so we have an appropriate list. We have jelly fungi, and I got to show you a picture of this. You ever see anything that's kind of like a blob of jelly on a tree? That's clear and shiny. There's some, I'm not sure how clear you can, it really looks, but there's orange. Here's another one. Just looks like a piece of sticky jelly stuck to a tree. Well, that would be a jelly fungus. Actually, while I'm at it, I'll show you a few pictures. There's some nice bracket fungi. Oops, there we go. Sticking to trees. There's some. These are really beautiful, actually. Beautiful rings. And on the underside of the bracket fungi, sometimes you find this structure, which would kind of be like that, looks like the morel. And so inside here, on the sides of these things, you're going to find these things. And same thing on the mushrooms, on the cap. You know how caps, you flip them over and they have all those lines, like they call them gills. Well, on the sides of the gills, you're going to find these things. And there's other kinds of shapes here too. We got lots and lots of different. There's one called the coral fungus. That's called the earth star. Lots of different Mycelium shapes. All right, so we've got the jelly fungi. Also, I want to mention something called a rust. Rusts. So if you see a leaf that looks like it's rusting, you know it can't be rust because rust happens on metal. You're like, that leaf looks rusty. Well, it's probably a fungus, but it's not making giant mushroom fruiting bodies. It stays very small, and it stays microscopic and just looks like rust. But if you looked under the microscope, you'd see fruiting bodies. And there's another disease called a smut. So smuts is a whole category of fungi. These two actually cause plant diseases. A lot of fungi aren't very fun. And then there's another one that can attack people. It's called Cryptococcus. C-R-Y-P-T, crypt, O, and then C-O-C-C-U-S. and this causes human disease. So when you read about those and you want to know how they're classified, they're on your chart. Alright, so we're almost done. All we have is this one down here, the zygote fungi, or zygomycota, and zygote means joined. So if you've done some cell biology, you might recognize the word zygote. We usually use that word for when an egg and sperm join. That cell that's formed is called a zygote. But zygote just means join. And here, the things that are joined are these two little reproductive structures, and they kind of look like two ice cream cones that got smashed together. Right? Here's a cone, somebody went smashed them together, and you get this big lump of ice cream. So it looks like two things joined. That's where it gets its name. There's another one. The ice cream would be in here. This one actually has some cute little things growing off the end there. Okay, and this is what it looks like microscopically. Here's the mycelium, the hyphae growing up. And so these things are called sporangiophores. That's where the spores are. Oh, there's one that's releasing the spores into the air. And spores are so tiny here. They just float in the air. And so these guys are your bread molds and your fruit molds. So where does the mold come from on a piece of bread? Well, you don't know it, but there's tiny little spores floating around in the air. You leave your bread out, you put it in the refrigerator, and it's already had these little spores fall onto it. You can't see it. Pretty soon the mycelium grows. And then the color, the blue or whatever, comes from these. You can't see the mycelium. So what you're seeing is all these things. And it's called Rhizopus stolonifer. That's the correct name for bread mold. I think Rhizopus, that's a kind of a neat name. So let's put that little zygote structure right in here. They don't all look just like this, but this will help us remember that picture. And it's fun because it looks like smashed ice cream cones. And then down here, let's draw some bread mold and some fruit mold. Let's just write food molds. And example, Rhizopus. R-H-I-Z-O-P-U-S, Rhizopus. So you can draw a little slice of bread here, like that. And some yucky mold on it. And then maybe rotten fruit. There used to be an apple or something. And some yucky mold on that. So the zygomycota are haunting your refrigerator. And then over here, the other example is called mucor. Another kind of cool word. And these guys are, it's like a whole family of organisms, and they're all plant diseases with names that are very unfamiliar, so I won't even mention them. I myself won't remember them. So there's all kinds of fungi that attack plants. So here's some more zygomycota plant diseases. Now, not all fungal plant diseases fall into this category, but some of them belong to that branch of the Zygomycota phylum. And the last category is one you don't really have to draw anything for, although we can make one little drawing right here. These are the chytrids, or the Chytridiomycota. And some people say chitrids or chytrids or chytrids. There's all kinds of ways that scientists say it. There's no consensus. So I don't know, I just say chytrids. And these spores have flagella and can swim. This is kind of crazy because they have those little tail things like sperm have, like some protozoans have, like Euglena. and so the spores can swim. So therefore, it's not a surprise that you find them in water or wet soil. They're always near water because otherwise there's no point in having a swimming tail if you're not near water. And some examples here are, number one, some species help to decompose dead things into dirt. So these guys would be very helpful on forest floors and compost piles. They help to recycle things. And number two, they attack plants and animals, and one species is killing amphibians. So you may have heard about this. Where are all the frogs going? There's a whole bunch of dead frogs in South America. Even those cute little brightly colored poison dart frogs in the rainforest, they're just disappearing every decade. There's a couple hundred more species that are just gone extinct, and they don't know why all the frogs are dying. A little bit, it's like, well, maybe they're losing their natural habitat, and, people are cutting down the rainforest, but that doesn't account for all of it. There's something else going on, and they found out it's a fungus. So the fungus attacks and just frogs, nothing else apparently. Just like the zombie ant fungus, it only attacks those ants. So here it picks on frogs. And so it's kind of sad that so many frogs are dying, and they're trying to collect the remaining frogs that aren't infected, and they're putting them in little frog zoos, and they're breeding them, trying to keep them alive. And so they're working very hard to find a way to get rid of this fungus. And then if the fungus disappears, then they can reintroduce the frogs back into the rainforest again. So there's active research going on. But anyway, so that's why these chytrids are famous. They're famous for being frog killers. I want to end by mentioning one more thing that isn't on this page, and that is lichens. Lichens come in different shapes and colors and textures, but a lichen is a fungus that's growing with an algae. So the fungal part would be another subcategory of the fungal kingdom that I haven't mentioned. So I've oversimplified here. There's other kinds of fungus that aren't on here. But this is a particular type that grows with algae cells, and the two of them growing together make a unique organism called a lichen. So that's just one other thing that the fungal kingdom can do that we haven't mentioned on this page.